Just let me check. Is my audio okay?
Yes.
Okay. So it's 11:02. We'll give it about another minute, and then I'll do a quick intro and we'll go from there. Okay. So I'd like to welcome you all to the IETF Newcomers Overview webinar. We try to do these in advance. In recent, I guess just this past year, we've started doing these in advance of the IETF. Rich Zahls, a longtime participant in the IETF and one of our security experts, is going to be presenting today. I'll be online moderating and sort of answering any questions that you want to put into the chat. So feel free to speak up and ask any questions that you have. And with that, Rich, I will let you take over.
Great, thank you. As they say, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. I am, as Karen said, I have worked in the security groups for my employer. Been involved with the IETF for longer than I care to admit. We have a number of people from the EDU team, which is educational and outreach and helps prepare slides and do these kinds of things. Karen is here. Miriam, you can see these if you look on the participants in the chat rooms on the left-hand side. Expand that. Greg Wood from the Internet Society, who also does a lot of the graphics coordination and help. And there are probably others, those marked as observers. On the bottom there, Tobiah is our Meet Echo representative. If you have AV problems, ping him directly, that I'll volunteer him for. And I apologize if I skipped anybody, missed anybody. The chat room will have where any links that are mentioned will be posted. If you have a question, click on the raise your hand icon there, which is in the upper, just one above. Karen will recognize you and either repeat the question or let you speak. The talk is divided into a couple of sections that we'll introduce on the next slide. If you have questions, sort of wait till we get to the end of a section. Take a note of, like, say what page it is, and I can jump back to it and so on. A couple of definitions. First timers, you know, kind of obviously, this is someone who is attending their first or planning on attending their first IETF. This slide deck and presentation is designed to help with that. It's sort of unusual if you've been to any other standard activities. It's a very different, the IETF is very different. Newcomers, the IETF meets 3 times a year. According to, you know, in March, we meet in the US, Canada, South America region. In July, we meet in Europe, and in November, we meet in Asia. Newcomers are, you know, we consider that, or people can consider themselves a newcomer if they've, you know, up to 5 meetings, which actually means, you know, it could be 2-3 calendar years that you've been attending the IETF, but you could still feel like a newcomer. There are people who have been attending IETF meetings for 15, 12, 20 years. There's no embarrassment or shame in any of that. We're glad to have you whenever you come. Okay, so welcome to the IETF. The URL at the top, that's the IETF's home site. I'll mention just for history's sake that two gentlemen, Scott Bradner and Mike St. John's, have done earlier presentations of this. You can find versions of their talks and videos online. Scott had started this whole thing and had been there doing it for years. He worked at Harvard for a number of years and then ultimately retired. They were going to, oops, sorry, jumped ahead on the slide. There were four major sections to this talk. Introduction to newcomers activities. We have a number of activities specifically for people who haven't been before or been often before. Then I'll talk about an introduction to the IETF structure. Somebody has to sign the agreements with the hotel if we have 1,000 people coming, right? It can't just be a bunch of engineers. No, few of us have that kind of signature authority. Related organizations. Then the overall, a nutshell of the overall week. And then finally end up with key people and additional resources for more information. On that last one, I'll mention we are also giving this tutorial during the Sunday tutorial sessions. Feel free to come multiple times. Feel free to drag, to corral any of the speakers, any of the people I mentioned at the beginning. Myself, Anshul is observing. She's going to be giving this slide talk at the end of this week. So we're here to help make it a more productive experience for you, and therefore it would be a more productive experience for the IETF. This slide, it's a two-part slide, is called the Note Well. There are certain policies that we expect that we require people to follow when they participate in IETF. You'll see this slide before every single session that you attend at the IETF. By the end of it, you can probably recite them, recite many of the things, BCP 79, recite much of the content on your own. Certainly on Thursday or Friday, people say, here's a Note Well slide, you've all seen it before, move right to the next one. You'll see it a lot. Do read this offline on your own and follow some of the links in it so that you're familiar with it. There are rules about intellectual property, there are rules about participation, there's anti-harassment guidelines and so on that we consider really important. You don't have to spend the time reading it now. On the next page are the specific links. BCP stands for Best Current Practice. And these point to specific RFCs, other documents. The BCP number stays the same, but the RFC number may change as things get modified over the course of the years. So you can find these, there's a privacy policy, you can find these documents, just type, IETF BCP 9 in your link, in your browser, in your search engine. The link at the top has a pointer to this Note Well document. Generally, every working group will condense this down into one page of very tiny print. But it's important to know that while you're participating, you agree to follow these practices. Okay, the first real section, newcomer activities. It starts on Sunday and Monday, basically. Sunday afternoon, we'll be redoing this tutorial. Anshul and I will be presenting. Please come by toward the end of it and sit in the back of the room and ask questions if you have stuff that does not get addressed, right now. The quick connections later on Sunday afternoon is, think of it like, it's not quite speed dating, but we have a number of people in the room volunteering who've been here for a while or participated for a long time. And short one-on-one, people will circulate around the room. The moderator at the front will say, okay, next, and you move on to the next station. All of this information can be found in the Newcomers slides, which I mentioned the link at the top. The meet and greet is more group conversation. This is where all of the working group chairs and the area directors will be gathered at little stations. And if you're interested in, say, routing or the domain system, you can congregate at those areas. And, I'm interested in wondering about DNS privacy. Where do I go? Or I want to understand how, BGP routing hijacking can be prevented. Where should I go? So that's the meet and greet. That rolls right. So the quick connections and the meet and greet are generally in the same room. And then that rolls right into the opening reception, which is where everybody comes in. You'll get most of the people there, a couple hundred folks. There is, hosted by one of the sponsors, appetizers, beer, wine, things like that. Here's a link about mentoring. We have a mentor program. If you are interested, you can say what kinds of things you're interested in, what languages you speak. The IETF does work all in English. Side conversations, of course, happen in whatever native languages there are. But if you want, you can say, I am a native Korean speaker interested in DNS, and we try to match up. The mentoring chair tries to match up people, with them, and that person will be available to you throughout the whole week to help guide you through. A newcomers dinner Monday night. You can sign up for that. I forget, Karen, do you know, is that generally a sign up, or it's posted on the attendees list, right? Or should they just check the newcomers page at the top? Do you recall?
Yeah, actually,
there'll
be an email.
There'll be an email that'll come out.
Okay.
And they sign up.
Okay, great. And that's a group pay for yourself. Group go out, share experiences, and so on. At the end of the week, there's a feedback session set aside so that we can take your feedback and push it back into the process. There's also tutorial evaluations and so on, so that we try to, continuous improvement, as they say. Okay, next. Preparing for an IETF meeting. So this slide deck is intended to help you get ready for the IETF week in 2 weeks, 1 week, 10 days. It doesn't talk about the history of the IETF. It doesn't talk about how to write a document. It doesn't talk about how to read a document. There are documents about this stuff. You don't have to know how to prepare and read a document, especially if you're a newcomer. It's, if you can identify things that are of interest to you, read those documents, and be prepared to discuss or comment on them, that should be a good measure of success. You should say you're successful. There is a YouTube channel where we have recorded versions of most of the working group sessions. Remote participation is possible. You can view these things, offline. But we want to just give you there's a lot to understand. The IETF has been functioning for 20 years, basically. And so we just want to help make it successful, make you successful at it. Before I get into the next thing, are there any questions about overall, the background about what we're doing here and so on? Questions about the Note Well? Okay, so I'll move into part 2. I'll give a quick overview of the IETF, the main groups. People probably have an idea of what a working group is, and I'll try to build down from that to talk about the overall structure, the IETF ecosystem. It's undergoing a bit of change now, so for the most part, you shouldn't care. If what you're interested is in the technical content, as opposed to the organizational governance, and who hosts the 501c3 charitable organization, There's different groups for that, but this is mainly, the technical. I want to focus on the technical infrastructure. So our mission is pretty simple. We want to make the internet work better. And there's a number of ways to do that. We want to make high quality documents. Somebody should be able to read what we call an RFC, or in particular a standards track RFC, and be able to implement it. We should be able to have interoperable implementations so that one person's implementation, say, of HTTP will work with any other implementation of HTTP. Now, human language and English language is full of ambiguities and possible misunderstandings. So we won't get it perfect, but our goal is to have interoperable specs that are needed. You can't have the web without a client and a browser and a server both speaking HTTP. Perhaps both adding security with TLS. Also, the browser needs to understand the domain system so that it can map a name to an IP address. The infrastructure components of that, such as your internet service provider, the other internet service provider, middle boxes along the way, other intermediaries such as content distribution networks, CDNs. They all need to understand routing. They also need to understand DNS and all of these kinds of things. But we want to make things interoperable, secure, possible to operate securely, and that it's deployed. We have turned away from work that wasn't widely deployable. There was talk of, when I remember in particular, about looking at internet file systems, right? There's some work going on that, but you think of things like, the only name that comes to mind is Dropbox, but there are 3 or 4 people in that field. And it doesn't make sense for the IETF to get involved in that because they're currently all point solutions, okay? So we're looking for stuff that's scalable, well-defined, well-written, as best as engineers can write it, and can be deployed effectively. So that's what we try to do. What is the IETF that does these things? We're called an SDO, Standards Development Organization. There are a number of those. For example, the largest overall one is ISO, the International Organization for Standards. There are every national body has their also own SDO. In the US, it's ANSI or IEEE. IEEE is also an international thing. There's the British Standards Institute. I forget the German name, but basically pretty much every country has their own organization that sets up national standards. And it's not just for computer technology, information technology. They tend to also get involved in, other things like the proper ratio of concrete mixes and so on, right? We're different. We focus purely on technology, the same way the IEEE focuses purely on electronic and computer technology. It's self-selected in that anybody can participate. There are no restrictions on who can join. There are no membership dues. The simplest thing you have to do is sign up for a mailing list, participate on a mailing list. We don't have formal voting. We do hum, and I'll get back to that later. But typically there are other formal voting. ISO or ITU will typically have ballots where each country gets one vote. We're more concerned about, the phrase we use is rough consensus and running code. If there's a spec and 10 entities have implemented an ambiguous part in one way, and 2 entities have implemented it in a different way, well, it tends to goes to the running code side of things. Rough consensus means we don't all have to agree. Not everything. There are many contentious and heated discussions within the IETF. But it does mean that everybody has to have their viewpoint heard. You know, the group could hear it and say, no, that's, thanks for contributing, but no, we're not going to focus on that, or we're not going to, you know, I disagree, and the majority of the people disagree. Humming is a really interesting kind of thing. There was a write-up, I think, in Tech Republic about the musical way TLS spec was done. And they talked about it. In person, on Sunday, we'll typically do a hum so people can get an idea of what it's like. There is a document on how the hums work. The other point is, well, I mentioned about the marketplace, and the point that makes us unique is we work from the bottom up. We work from an engineer, a technician, a technology person says, I have an issue that I want to solve. I think it's deployable. I believe it's of general use to the internet. And they get a group of like-minded engineers, developers, technologists, whatever you want to call them, together, and they work on a problem or a problem statement, and then it bubbles up through the area directors, and then we say, okay, we'll charter a group that says, yes, you should work on this kind of thing, right? As opposed to people from the top down saying, oh, we need a new version of the wireless access protocol, right? Or anything like that, or new mix of rubber in the tires. There is no formal government role. It used to be, well, there is no formal government role, in particular, not even the US. It's a loose, independent configuration. There are government standards which will point to RFCs as standards. The RFC, the IETF has no authority to enforce its standards. You'll hear the phrase, we're not the protocol police. If somebody does something that's wrong or non-interoperable, there's really nothing the IETF can do. We get our leverage from the network effect. If everybody else is doing it one way and you're doing it this way, then you really want to talk with everybody else. So it's different. The IETF is organized into areas of related work. Area is actually a specific term as well as a generic term. We have area directors, the people who manage the area. So this is it's the first phase of a hierarchy. The areas have changed over time. I think about 2 years ago, we shuffled some things around. Maybe it was 3. And you'll see these 3-letter abbreviations. My area is, security. And these are, here's the definitions. You can get the link is in the, the link will show up to these slides in the, it's listed on, you can get it on slide 5. But it's also available on the website. I'm not going to read through these and all of the definitions, but there are things starting at the lowest level, DNS, network routing, security. General is sort of general internet that has nowhere else to go, including, let's call it the metadata part of how the IETF itself is organized, such as where do we meet, how do we meet, and what kind of legal structures do we need? The web tends to be in ART. Transport tends to be things like TCP, UDP, route, congestion control, and so on. Talk about consensus. Scroll up here. Sorry. So as I mentioned before, the key thing is rough consensus. Here is the full quote by Dave Clark, MIT professor who was involved in the very, very early days of the ARPA and internet. And, rough consensus in running code, you'll often see that on t-shirts worn at the IETF. The key definition is all the issues have to be addressed, but not all accommodated. Okay. Dissent is heard, but it doesn't control. You can't hijack a conversation. You can't hijack a direction of the way that, to force something to be addressed. Typically, or standard for the IETF, there is a document called an RFC that talks about it, written by Pete Resnick, a longtime participant. All of the consent, a lot in the working group meetings, in the face-to-face meetings, we work by humming. Humming has a number of advantages. It's anonymous. You can't tell who else is humming, so it's hard to see who else is interested. I hate to use the word vote, but who else is going for one side or another. You base it on volume because it's really hard to hum loud as opposed to, say, clapping or yelling or talking. So it's very interesting, and it's very unusual, as I said, compared to other things. We don't even, the only time you'll generally see people, the chairs saying, okay, show of hands, is when we look to see how many people have read a particular document or who agrees to review a document, so that we can take names for the volunteer list, or we can get an idea of how many people know what they're talking about. Okay, so let me talk about the culture. If you've been involved in the computer field, not much of this should be new to you. IETF is computer people. We tend to be passionate. We tend to have our own hobby horses. We tend to be very smart. We tend to be very vocal. Less so, and don't feel you have to speak up for newcomers and first timers. But also don't be afraid to. We probably get more than our fair share of people who can be brusque or abrupt. Don't take it personally. People are commenting on the ideas and the technology suggestions, not on the individuals. If they do comment, it's joking between people who have known each other for a decade or more. Okay. So someone will stand up and go, this is a really stupid idea. If you're the one who said that idea, or you were in favor of that idea, try to understand, what it is they're saying. Again, don't take it personally, because someone else will come up next and say, no, that commentary is all off base. They're missing the main point, and stuff like that. Technical excellence is the only thing that really counts. Not totally, but you can't harass and you can't abuse people, but it's the main point that counts. Informal dress code. People show up wearing whatever they're comfortable with. There are a number of long-term participants, and by number it may be as small as a handful, who wear three-piece suits. There are people who wear, yarmulkes or other symbols of faith. There are people who wear jeans and a t-shirt. There are people who wear jeans and a t-shirt, and the only t-shirts they wear are those from previous IETF meetings. Earrings, tattoos, no earrings, no tattoos, close cropped. Be comfortable. Wear something that feel free to wear whatever you would wear in public or in your office. You get a free t-shirt like any other meeting, tech meeting. Nobody, again, we judge by what you say, not by what you wear. The people who have been coming to these IETF meetings for years and years, it's a chance to renew friendships face to face. Oh, look, my company paid to send me to London, and now I get to see, Dave Crocker again, or something like that. Right? There are close working relationships. They continue outside of the face-to-face meetings with email conversations on the working group, privately, and so on. People do know each other. Don't be intimidated by this. If you see a couple of people talking, and you want to ask one of them a question because you heard him or her say something the other day, or earlier that day or in the previous session, just sort of stand there and wait to be, excuse me, I want to ask you what you meant by this. It's the whole point of the meetings. Okay, the alphabet soup. Yeah, welcome back to the 1990s of the web with the little under construction guy. The green box is the main thing that counts. But I'll just mention this to provide a larger context. The Internet Society works to promote the growth and involvement of the internet globally. They are a fairly large organization. They have Internet Society fellows where people are appointed from around or chosen from around the world, sent to the IETF conferences and sent to other things. The ISOC been a long time active supporter of the IETF. The blue area is the legal infrastructure of the IETF. There are two things. The most important things are the working groups, from a technical viewpoint, the working groups and the secretariat. There has to be some kind of legal entity because, like I said earlier, somebody has to sign the hotel contracts. A hotel is not going to reserve rooms for 1,000 people unless somebody ponies up and makes a deposit and does all of that kind of stuff. Somebody has to manage the bank accounts. Somebody has to hold the intellectual property, such as the trademarks, the copyright, and so on, and that's the trust. Somebody has to be a liaison to these other organizations that help support the IETF, handle contributions. That's IASA, the thing, Internet Administrative Support Activity. It's being changed. There's a new LLC corporation being created, actually, just created a month ago. For the most part, you don't have to worry about it. Just if you see these names, you'll know what they are. The IAB is really, kind of part of the IETF. It is a group of senior people who think about the long-term direction, technical direction of the internet. Not can I get fiber to every home, but can I get IPv6 everywhere? What's preventing that? What is the preventing IPv6 working over mobile networks? Things like that. Not caps and so on. The big thing is the green box. You'll see a number of circles there, each circle representing an area. The areas are the ones mentioned 2 or 3 slides back. So inside security, one I'm most familiar with, you'll see TLS, ACME certificates, Kernel encryption, and so on. All of that stuff and the planning and so on is run by the IAOC. The secretariat handles all of the day-to-day paperwork, filing. Blue sheets are when people sign in, as I believe you had to do for this presentation. The secretariat collects all of those sheets. They make sure that blank sheets are available. They make sure that MeetEcho is in all of the meeting rooms. They help with the they coordinate the volunteers to set up the internet network at the IETF. If you haven't been to an IETF before, the hotel network is unlike anything you've seen. It's worth swinging by the NOC, the Network Operations Center, just to look in at some point. It's an amazing volunteer collection. They build a huge, vast network that's free for all participants. Then they also wire that through the hotel and sometimes the overflow hotel, so that I remember at one point walking around Montreal when I overheard 2 random people saying, "Oh, I don't know who this IETF hotel is, but boy, do they have great connectivity." So it's a very impressive engineering effort if you're into network engineering. Briefly about the technical parts of that alphabet soup. As I mentioned, the IAB does oversight of the whole internet architecture, impact of mobile, impact of IPv6, impact of general privacy concerns. They tend to run workshops. They also do oversight. They look at, they approve nominated positions, some of them. The IESG, the IETF Engineering Steering Group, this is the people responsible for the management of the meetings and, management of the technical groups. They approve, who the area, it's composed of all the area directors. They approve, what activities are being done and so on. The IRTF is similar to the IETF, but rather than having working groups, it has research groups. There's a group on cryptography, there's a group on human rights, there's a group on general privacy. And then the IOC is, as I said, the legal entity that hosts all of these other activities. Any questions before I move on to the next section? And you can type them in the chat room. Okay, let me talk about the week in a nutshell. It's easy to get overwhelmed. It's easy to, say, oh, I remember one meeting I went with like 5 or 6 people from Akamai, my employer, and at the end of the day, at the end of the week, we were all gonna, walk around and go look at some tourist thing. And I said, no, I'm done. Too many people. I'm gonna go off by myself and just have some quiet. It can happen halfway through. It can happen in the middle of the day. There are, the lounge, the IETF has most of the hotel and most of the meeting rooms, and there's lounge spots and so on. Don't worry about having to take it all in. It is too much. Working groups, these are the individual units, individual group activities that are working on specific things. TLS, public key for BGP, DNS privacy, Quick, a new kind of transport that spans the stack, the 7-layer stack, if you will. About 130 total. I think about 90 of them are meeting next week, 10 days. Birds of a feather is sort of the first step to a working group. Someone, they'll be listed. There's a 103 attendees list. There are, and so it'll be posted in the area lists, saying, oh yeah, I'm having people who are interested in looking at trusted execution, Secure Zone or Intel SGX, Secure Zone being the ARM one. Sorry, all my examples are in security. That has, after 1 or 2 BOFs, that became a technical working group. Area sessions, this is where all of the security groups or all of the internet groups will each present a brief update on what happened, or if they're haven't met yet. There's often a guest speaker. There's a plenary, which stands for large group meeting. It's a Latin word. That's where all of those alphabet soup things you saw before, they will each give a presentation. Beforehand, they will share slides and so on. It typically lasts, 1 or 2 hours. There's snarking and drinking games, drink every time somebody says deployment. In the large, the largest ballroom. Okay. Hackathons, these things happen Saturday and Sunday. Saturday tends to be working on some of the tooling that goes on. If you look at the website datatracker.ietf.org, that's the website that maintains, all of the working groups, pointers to all of the mailing lists, the agendas, the meeting materials, and all of that. That tends to be on Saturday. And also Saturday, Sunday is where there's hackathons. People get together and work on early implementations. There's a message level security one, a first draft spec out. There is DNS privacy, DNS over TLS. How would that work? People with their own implementations or working, group implementations will work on that. These two things have become very important to the IETF. It's the second half of our key phrase, rough consensus and running code. So this is a chance for people to get together, work on the code that they've got, work on the code that they're a member of, and make progress. Because if you're debugging something and you can't communicate with the other side, it's really great if the other side is sitting across the table from you. You can register to join these on the IETF website. You get a t-shirt, you get lunch, there's presentations, and it's mentioned at the plenary what the best hackathon was. There are tutorials, most of those are Sunday, I went through those on slide 3. Lunch sessions, social events, the social tickets, I forget where it is this time, but there'll be a social event where the tickets are limited, but anyone can buy them, and buying and selling them, because I can't use my social ticket. Anybody got a social ticket? That becomes the biggest email threads during the IETF attendees list. This picture, by the way, is the IETF sisters, SYSTERS. This is women who were involved in the IETF. I don't want to say it's a support group, an affinity group maybe, but women in the IETF. That one you do register for because they provide lunch and they need to know how many lunches to buy. But any woman is certainly welcome to that. There are other things that go on. Hallway meetings, which means you corner somebody up. Often people will come and go, hey, can I talk to you after the meeting? Or as the meeting is breaking up, hey, can we go out and talk for a minute about this point? I think you missed this aspect, or I don't think you're allowing for this use case. That's a hallway quote unquote meeting. You can see here a picture of one. This is lots of laptops, a hotel lobby / bar. There's bar boss, which means group of people interested in a technical topic get together at one of the hotel bars or one of the nearby bars. Yeah. Marathon editing sessions. People who had meetings at the beginning of the week and a bunch of open issues will get together and work and wordsmith and write updates to their drafts. People who were meeting at the end of the week, toward the end of the week, will get together to fix all open issues before the meeting so they can say, here's the issues we closed, and so on. There is an IETF app. Find it in your typical app store. It is updated for every IETF with the full agenda. There's the agenda is online. The app is useful. It has pointers to links to all the documents. It has the meeting rooms. There's a floor map and so on. We have paper copies of the agenda at the registration desk, but we're trying to obviously recycle and conserve paper, so they tend not to be as useful and as widespread as they used to be. Well, they're still useful. They don't carry last minute changes, but they're not as ecologically worthwhile. Yeah, it says this is a photo of a hackathon, but I'm not positive it's a hackathon. Okay, working groups. This is where most of the IETF work takes place. It is done on mailing lists between meetings. The point of the meetings is for people to stand up, say, here's what happened since the last meeting. Here are the open key issues. Let's talk about them. You can see, it's hard to tell, but if you zoom in on the picture, there's someone up front talking. He's got a co-presenter who is remote. There's a slide at the front. The IETF we'd call this an eye chart slide because there's a lot of text. Slides are very simple. Black on white, no company logos generally, just lists, often bullet lists, not block diagrams, very, very simple, easy to produce via PowerPoint, LibreOffice, OpenOffice, whatever you'd like. And then in the middle there, you see people at what's called the mic line. someone's talking and presenting on, what the current draft is, say, and then people line up at the mic to ask questions or to have an open discussion. This may be at the end of the presentation where there's more open discussion, or they may be talking during the slides to say, I have a clarifying question. When you said one round trip, did you mean server to client, client to server? That kind of technical clarification question. Open discussion would be, well, when you said a round trip, is that the average round trip? Because I think if you should take the worst case round trip, blah, blah, blah. The sessions are all streamed, video streamed on the internet. They're all recorded. People will occasionally go back to the meeting to verify minutes or to play things that, sometimes there was a conflict and they couldn't attend both sessions they wanted to. So they'll go back, pardon me, and play a session. The charter of a working group describes what the working group should do. DNSOP is about the operation of the domain name system. And it might have a few milestones. It has to have milestones because we want to be able to measure progress against the charter and determine if we're actually meeting it. If the working group isn't meeting its requirements or its schedule, we can revise the schedule. That happens often, probably almost all the time, because we're always optimistic. Oh yeah, we can get this spec done in 9 months. Oh no, 19 months. It could be, it's also used to bound the problem. Someone will say, hey, I found this security issue about trusting web certs in Acme. So, okay, but that's not really an Acme issue. Go off and see this other group where it fits in the charter. And it also relates to, if you can't define the problem and you can't come up with an at least initial set of goals, then it's not ready to become a working group yet. Maybe have another BOF, maybe discuss it on the mailing list until you can come up with a concrete description, and definition of what the problem and the likely solution are. Okay. Okay. Oh, did I skip one? No. General meeting, read the documents, talk to people, sleep, be respectful, be tolerant. There's going to be all sorts of different people from all around the world. The IETF is a global thing. It can be an eye-opener. It also means you have freedom, but respect other people's, freedoms and behavior. Okay. I think I'm going to skip a bit. Yeah, session etiquette. This is worth knowing. Speaking to the mic, say your name every single time. You give your name and affiliation. Rich Saul Akamai. People in the IETF participate as individuals. We still say our company name. Blue sheets, you have to say your name because someone is recording that. It's important to know where ideas come from. It's important to understand who proposed something for intellectual property issues. If you have patents, don't speak at the IETF meetings. Understand what the note well says. There's a Jabber channel, Jabber being XMPP protocol, so that every working group, foo, will have a Jabber room, foo.jabber, foo@jabber.ietf.org. There's back channel, there's chance for clarification. There is a Etherpad, which is a website collaborative editing, not unlike Google Docs, where minutes are often taken, and all of these are posted after the meeting. Any technical questions or comments you have are highly accepted. The IRTF, since I'm kind of short on time, I'll skip this one. Research. One of the things they do is they have a networking prize. Papers devoted to the IETF are submitted by anyone. who can submit a paper. Oh, I really like this paper, on TCP round trip delays. And then they give the prize recipients get, free admission to the IETF next time. And I think some of their travel expenses. Lunch talks, typically the sponsor will have a chance to talk about, the main sponsor will have a chance to talk about something. Whole sessions on the area, the internet area, the transport area, and so on. Transport will have a session where they figure out, there's a section devoted to new work, and they figure out which working group to put it in. The plenaries is the whole IETF thing, all 1,000 people in a ballroom sitting down. I mentioned the hackathons and code sprints. So here is, you see people working, there's small group tables for people working on specific areas, people collaborating and looking over, packet dumps and so on. Social events, this one on the left was in the Singapore last year. We had the social event, dinner and drinks, buffet and drinks. And this was at the Singapore Aquarium, which was pretty wild. I spent a lot of time watching the octopus. It's cool. There's another picture of the sisters, a different sisters lunch. All right, that's the week. If there aren't questions, I'll just proceed on to the last thing about resources for further information. Pictures soon. I mentioned who the secretariat are. The RFC editor is a collection of people, the English majors in the group who know how to make subject-verb agreement work, who know how to understand, antecedents and pronouns and things like that. IANA are the people who say things like DNS goes on port 53, HTTP goes on port 80, TLS, HTTPS goes on port 443, and so on. And there's, a list of people who keep those pages, what extensions are necessary or allowed in TLS. The executive director is the person who runs, whose job it is to keep track of all those things. The ombuds team, very important. If you have any instances of harassment or you're made to feel uncomfortable, contact the ombuds team, the ombudsman team. These are all longtime IETF participants. We don't tolerate harassment, physical, emotional, mental, any kind. We want to be a welcoming place for everybody who has something to contribute. So, and there's a specific anti-harassment policy. And if you see any of these people, they'll have a dot on their name tag. The dots. This is what in the upper right you see what the name tag looks like. And then there are different colored dots, and there'll be a handout or a sandwich board that describes what these are. There's a working group label, just to help identify. You can feel free to go up to someone and say, "Oh, you're the chair of the, the bind working group," not bind, but DNS working group. I had a question. Who do I speak to about this? It's to identify. It's not for pride of position. It's to make them easier to find during the IETF. Specific links. The tutorials are all here. There's a wiki. One of the most useful things at the wiki is people start to post transportation, ride sharing information, social ticket exchange. How do I what's the best way to get to the, from the airport to the overflow hotel? Lots of times there are natives posting on these, right? Obviously they're attending the IETF, and they can say, "Oh, well, you can do the taxi, but during the day it's better to get a ride sharing program." More resources. There's a mailing list specifically for newcomers, women at the IETF. And then there's other things. We do have some events for traveling companions. If your spouse or partner are coming. There aren't kids, there's no daycare or childcare. But if your spouse and kids are coming, there are often activities or pointers to activities that they can participate in. It's tough to bring family members because you are busy from 8 in the morning to 11 at night often, or you can be. And some of it's certainly social, but at the end of the day, you're fried. The data tracker is the place where we have, it's the one-stop shopping for all of the working groups, all of the agenda materials, all of the presentations, and so on. There's a tool page once you've written documents or are participating in writing documents. You might care about the tools page more. Just leave that for now. Remote participation. Here's our MeetEcho team. So actually, most of them are online. So these are the folks who handle all of the video and audio, including this one. I think I should wrap up. There's the network. There are IPv4, IPv6, NAT. There's a terminal room. It doesn't have terminals. It has a printer. So if on Thursday night you need to print your boarding pass, there you go. The name and password for those networks that require it are IETF. We try to do encrypted wireless. It's not like other conferences. People aren't going to be hacking the wireless, but just general privacy is a big concern at the IETF. Jabber, as I said, there's a chat room for basically every single working group. One of the things that will happen at the beginning of a session is we'll look to someone to take minutes and someone to be the Jabber scribe. The Jabber scribe is the person who handles requests from remote participants to say something at the mic. Enjoy yourself. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, we got everyone here is laughing. This is early in the week. The fireworks show, I remember one of them was really fun. That was in Prague, I think. It's a good time. It is an overwhelming time. We want to help make it worthwhile for you because that will make it more worthwhile for the IETF and we'll get better at our jobs. With that, any other questions? All right. Yeah, go, Karen.
All right, well, go ahead. I was just going to say, if you don't have any questions now, if you can feel free to send them to us. Also, feel free to send us any feedback on ways to improve this, and hope to see you in Bangkok.
Thanks for your time.
Do you have any closing? All right. Thank you, everybody.